Hi folks, welcome to this video on personality. So this is on the sports psychology A-level topics. It's always worth putting a definition in of personality whenever you're answering a question on it. There are loads of different definitions out there. I prefer this one for no particular reason. It's the combination of our traits / characteristics that make us act and behave in the way that we do. Very important point that traits is another term for characteristics. We're going to deal with traits in a couple of minutes' time in a little bit more detail, but traits mean characteristics. Characteristics are traits. Now, in psychology, there's an approach to personality called the narrow band approach. Narrow in terms of some people say that there are only two personality types in the world. There are type A personalities and there are type B personalities. And you may have even done questionnaires to find out if you are a type A or a type B. We're going to look at some of the traits or characteristics of each. Now, as you might expect, they're opposite to each other. So if you are, or you know someone who's a type A personality, they're impatient, they're intolerant, they have high levels of stress. They're your hotheads on the pitch, on the court, quickly lose it, often involving scuffles and fights and things like that. Whereas your type B personalities, they're relaxed, they're very tolerant, they have low levels of stress. Let's say it was all to kick off during a game and there was a big punch-up. Your type A personalities would be the one running in from all corners to try and get involved and throw a punch. Whereas your type B personalities would typically be standing back. What is the point in all this? It's not going to achieve anything, etc., etc. So it's quite, like we said, it's a narrow band. It is pretty much dividing people into one category or the other. But we often find that the bulk of people sit here, somewhere between the two. And they have elements of a type A personality and we have elements of a type B personality. We can also bring in another word here, anxiety. Anxiety is a negative emotion. You know, people are anxious, typically fearful, nervous, worried. You know, you probably know people who have anxiety. Now, interestingly, the exam board focus on state anxiety, but they don't mention something called trait anxiety. But I'm just going to tell you what it is, just so you're aware. Traits, remember, are characteristics. Characteristics are inherited. So you inherited your traits, your characteristics from your mum and dad, and they last you your lifetime. But obviously, we all have a characteristic for anxiety. Now, some of us are very naturally highly anxious. Therefore, we have what's called high trait anxiety. We have the high level of the anxiety trait. Whereas other people have low trait anxiety. It takes a lot to get them wound up. They're very chilled out, very relaxed. However, what the exam board wanting to focus on is state anxiety. That's anxiety brought on by a situation. For example, taking a penalty, taking a free throw, something where this matters, I better get this right. What we typically find is type A personalities have high state anxiety. When they're put in that competitive situation, and this matters, this counts, we've got to do it right now, they will get anxious very, very quickly. They'll have high state anxiety. Equally, B personalities, they generally have low state anxiety. Come away from sport, link it to what you're going to do at some point. You're going to do an exam, or you're going to do exams in subjects. If exams always get you stressed out and you always get worried and you always start to panic, then you have high state anxiety towards exams. It's been brought on by the situation, i.e. the exam. If you're not, you know, if you get a little bit nervous, a little bit worried, but you generally feel cool, calm, relaxed, I'm going to go in and show what I know, then you will typically have low state anxiety. That situation, that state hasn't made you overly anxious. So just be aware of that. And like I said, type A personalities will typically have high state anxiety because they have high trait anxiety as well. They are naturally anxious people, whereas type B personalities typically have low trait anxiety. They're not naturally anxious, and therefore they have low anxiety associated with a lot of situations or a lot of states. But there are also other theories surrounding personality type, and you may have all heard of Bandura, particularly those who are studying psychology as well. Bandura is like the father of social learning theory, also known as observational learning theory. So Bandura says this: our personalities can change, and they change with the situation, the environment that we are in. You know, what is social learning theory? What is observational learning? We watch and copy those around us who we look up to and admire. This little boy is watching his dad and he's copying him. So our personalities can be changed depending on who we are with and where we find ourselves. So it explains why some people, will show certain personality types to certain people, then put them in a sporting situation where the pressure's on and they'll suddenly become someone else. They'll show a totally different personality. And you might accuse them of being two-faced or whatever else. But, that's showing the fact that we are influenced by what is going on around us. And this is all part of social learning theory. And it emphasizes the fact of why we need very good and positive role models if we want people to behave in the proper manner, in a behaved way. Hence why, national governing bodies and organizations are very quick to highlight and punish players, performers who've been accused of domestic abuse, racism, anything like that, because they don't want children in particular copying that behavior. Because kids look up to sports superstars, and sports are very keen to highlight their clean cut image individuals as healthy, good role models in the hope that children will copy them instead. Now, the opposite viewpoint, the opposing viewpoint, are trait theories and trait theorists. Eysenck and Cattell are two of the biggest trait theorists. Now, they say, and quite right they are in saying this, the traits, your characteristics, like we said, they are inherited from your mum and dad. They are fixed. It's genetic. You don't change your genes. Therefore, your personality is fixed. Therefore, it's consistent, and therefore it is predictable. Now, this is quite important research because, if this is the case, it means that we could find out someone's personality type and see if they are better suited to certain sports than other people, to see if they're always going to lose their cool in a situation or whether they're going to stay calm. It's important to know which personality type an individual is so we know what they're going to do in a given situation. Now, within this, there are a couple of categories. Number one is stable and unstable, or stable and neurotic. So even within our characteristics that are fixed, there are those that are unchangeable and totally predictable. So you might be the one that is always calm in a situation. You're always the relaxed Mr. or Miss Cool, the dependable one. But there are still some, even though they are fixed and inherited, there are some that are still changeable. You can ramp up or calm down. So, we've all inherited a gene for aggression. We all have aggression built into us. But it can be increased or decreased depending on the importance of the game. I should say important, sorry, not important. So, if, for example, a derby game, a cup match, chances are you're going to see more aggression than mid-table, end of the season, result not that important match. So there are some that they can be ramped up. There's some that are fairly fixed all the way through. And also within this idea of trait theories, i.e. we're born with a certain personality type, we've got extroverts and introverts, or extraversion and introversion. Extroverts, lively, sociable, excitable, but often lack concentration, whereas introverts, independent, quiet, calm, with high concentration. Now, the theory is your team sports are mainly made up of extroverts, whereas your individual sports are mainly made up of introverts. Now, there's quite a bit of debate and issues surrounding that. For example, Usain Bolt is an individual sport. I think he's a 100-meter runner, yet he's probably one of the most extrovert sports people on the planet. And equally, there are those people that play team sports who demonstrate really, really high levels of concentration. And there are those individuals who have extremely low levels of concentration, are extremely excitable. So this is met with a little bit of caution. And like I said, social learning theory is that our personality is totally changeable and based on who we watch, who we're with, whereas these theories say that your personality is fixed and relatively unchangeable. Both have got the strengths in terms of their arguments, both have got the weaknesses, but both of them have led to this idea of the interactionist theory of personalities, i.e. it's about our traits interacting in our environment and with our role models. That's what leads to our personality, i.e. a combination of trait theory and social learning theory. So let's just have a quick look at this. So like I just said, the interactionist approach, our personality is actually a combination of the environment and the situations we find ourselves in, i.e. social learning theory, and our inherited traits and characteristics that we get from mum and dad, i.e. trait theory. So those two theories interact with one another, hence we've got interactionist theories. There's two that maybe sum it up best. Hollander's model that I've got here. So what Hollander said was, there's your core, that blue circle in the middle, your psychological core. That's where your traits are. That's where your characteristics are. So that's where trait theory exists. But then wrapped around that, you've got these concentric circles. You've got the typical responses you'll give in certain situations. You have got your role-related behaviours, and then you have got your social environment. What do we mean by role-related behaviours? Well, think about today. You've probably played the role of student, potentially employee, teammate, son, daughter, brother, sister, auntie, uncle. You've played all those roles, and I bet you've displayed different traits and different characteristics to those people who you're with. You will say and do things to your friends you would never say to your mum and dad, and vice versa. So that's what the roles are, and then equally the social environment, who you are with, big groups, small groups. Is it competitive? Is it non-competitive? Is it a classroom? Whatever. So, i.e., our traits are always there at the core of our personality, but then our environment and who we are with and what role we are playing also affects and changes, i.e., the environment situation changes which characteristics we will display. And so another psychologist who believed in or believes in interactionist theories is Lewin, who basically has put that into an equation. B equals FPE, where B is behaviour, F is function, P is personality, and E is the environment. In other words, our behaviour, how we act, is a function of our personality, i.e. our traits, and the environment, who we are with, what we are doing, where we find ourselves. So again, both these theories are acknowledging the fact that yes, we do have traits, and they are fixed, like Eysenck and Cattell said. We are stable or neurotic, we are extrovert or introvert, we fall into these categories. But we also have a changeable environment, which ultimately affects which characteristics we show, which traits we demonstrate, and to what extent. Finally then, tucked away in the personality section is this idea of POMS, profile of mood state. It is in its own highlight little box, but I think I'm unsure as to how much this is going to be on the course in terms of questions on the exam, but I'm just going to quickly go over it to make sure we've covered it. Something else to do with personality is this idea of a profile of mood state, which is in essence a questionnaire. And the questionnaire measures or aims to measure these 6 emotions here: tension, depression, anger, vigour, fatigue, and confusion. Just put that there so we've got it written down. The questionnaire measures 6 emotions. 5 of the emotions are negative: tension, depression, anger, fatigue, and confusion. And 1 of the emotions is positive: vigour. Vigour, like if you're full of vigour, you're full of energy, you're feeling confident, you're ready to go. Just one of those terms that's been used over the years. And then what you do is you get you turn your scores into certain numbers, what's called T-scores that come up on the side, and you plot your scores. And what we generally find is this: if a performer is going through a bad run of results, they generally have relatively consistent scores across all 6 emotions. So the tension isn't necessarily high, and the depression isn't, and the anger isn't, and the vigor's okay, it's not too bad. Maybe they're a bit tired, confusion is a bit low, it's relatively consistent. Whereas an athlete who is performing really, really well, totally on top of their game, demonstrates this: massively high vigour, and then very low levels in comparison on the other 5 negative emotions. And we call this an iceberg profile. An iceberg sticks out above the sea level. Well, there's the sea level, your non-successful or less successful performer. And there's the peak of the iceberg of your successful performer sticking out above the top there. And it's important that that iceberg is on vigour. You don't want it on anger or depression or tension or fatigue or confusion. You want it on the positive score. So as we've put down there, successful performers have an iceberg profile, much higher vigour score compared to the other 5 negative emotions. Sorry, should have brackets there as well. Worth noticing that sometimes we have tension or maybe anger sometimes is a little bit higher than the other 4 emotions, because you're naturally putting yourself in situations that, highly competitive situations to prove how good you are, or you want to get your anger higher because you want to show how good you are. But, the iceberg profile is high vigour score compared to the 5 negative emotions, whereas less successful performers, score relatively consistently across all 6 emotions. So it's pretty much flatline all the way across. And what we generally find is that as a performer is getting successful, they will show this iceberg profile, whereas if they're performing relatively inconsistently, they will show this kind of profile here. So it's a good way to track the moods, personality, how your athlete is psychologically feeling at this moment in time. So this is everything on personality, and I hope you found this video useful, folks.